So before I begin this morning, I wanted to say thanks to Eric for sharing last Sunday and talking about just the importance too of where the life is truly it's in Jesus and so we're talking about spiritual disciplines and the importance of disciplines, and so I want to just emphasize again some things about what it means, what it looks like, and the importance of those. And so thank you, Eric, for jumping in there last Sunday. I enjoyed it, so thank you. Amen. Yeah, give it up. Pastor Eric. Amen. In one of the more recent episodes of Blackish, anybody watch Blackish at all? In one of the more recent episodes of Blackish, the episode ends with Dre, he's the father, Dre Johnson, on his way out as he turns to his wife and he says this to Rainbow. He says, "How did we get to this place?" And so they were having some hard times in their marriage, and so they were going to split and take a little bit of time apart from each other. And so those were his words. How did we get to this place? Have you ever asked that question? I was thinking about that, and I thought, it's interesting sometimes how intentionally we can go to the place that we want to go. Out of intention, right? Because we've intentionally put ourselves on a certain path. And then I was also thinking, it's interesting to think that, we can also intentionally, maybe you've heard of this word, self-sabotage. It's like we have an idea where we want to go, and we have this goal, we have this object, we have this destination, but then we can also find ourselves intentionally making sure we don't get to that place. Self-sabotage or just bad, poor decisions that get in the way of that. Intentionally doing those. Come on, how many know what I'm talking about? Also, we can unintentionally end up somewhere where we never saw ourselves going. How did we get there? Just unintentionally, we end up there. Or there's also that possibility we can unintentionally end up being in the place that we wanted, but somehow we get there and we're like, how did we get there? We don't know how we got there. We're just there. I'm not sure, but we are. There was a time in Centralia when Amy and I, we bought our first house, and some of you can relate to this. The housing market's a little bit different, and this was a number of years ago, but $74,000, we got this cute little Craftsman-style story-and-a-half house in downtown Centralia. Just amazing. So we moved into that, and I've never been a big yard guy, but you own your own home now, and so you start, wanting to pay attention to those. You don't want to be one of those neighbors, I don't want to make too much of keeping up with the Joneses, but so there was a time where I thought, it'd probably be a good idea if I just started taking care of the yard a little bit. And so I got a thatcher from a friend, and I thatched the yard, and I fertilized the yard, and believe it or not, though, there were 2 big spots in our front yard. And if you want to put that picture, Debbie, I don't know if any of you can relate to that. That's not the picture of my front yard, but found it on the web. But there were just 2 spots that I could not get for the life of me to grow grass. Have you ever noticed that before? How there's certain areas you really want to have grass, you can't get it, and there are other areas you don't want grass, and you get grass. Now, contrast that with, I had a rock pile, right, river rock in the back behind our little barn shed thing in the back. It was really old and ugly in our house, but in the back, in the alleyway, I had a pile of river rock. And you know what? There was grass growing on that river rock. Birds dropping seed, a little bit of dirt gathering in there, and all of a sudden there's grass going there. And I'm thinking, why can't I get grass in the spot I wanted to? And then, in a place that you never thought it would grow grass, there it is. It's growing grass. So eventually I got a breakthrough though. So I talked to a friend of mine who's a landscaper and he, is meticulous about his lawn care. And so he gave me some ideas. So I got some peat moss. I went to the store. I put some peat moss down. I put down some seed. By the way, I had reseeded before too. I put seed down again and still couldn't get it to grow. But this time I put down peat moss on those 2 spots. I put seed down. I put fertilizer down. And then I covered it with grass clippings, watered it, took care of it. So what I found is over the course of time, I had the right combination of heat, water, I changed the environment, and as I changed the environment of the grass there in those 2 spots, the results changed. When we think about spiritual disciplines and disciplines for life, disciplines are important because what it is it represents this opportunity to change the environments of our life. And how many know sometimes we have to change the environments if we want to get the results that we think we should get? Last Sunday, Eric mentioned the part of our brain that associates, that back part of our brain that associates discipline with punishment or with a negative connotation. Right? Maybe you hear the word discipline, you think, I don't want anything to do with that. Maybe your dad or your mom spanked you, and it's like automatically you get these images of discipline, so you push back against it. And I get that. But I was wondering, could we take that word and could we flip it and could we turn it into a positive? Could we rewrite the script on it? Instead of thinking about it in a negative sense, what if we rewrote the narrative of what it means to live a discipline, to have spiritual disciplines in our life? What if we took it and we flipped it and we began to reclaim that word in a positive sense? In a sense that it brings understanding and it brings life to where we are as people. So let's reclaim the word and let's give it a better narrative. How's that sound? So that's what we want to do in this series. So think about it. Disciplines are simply their practices, their activities, whatever name you choose to give them. There are things that simply change the atmosphere of our lives, that really set us up, put us in a place to be able to, like I talked about a couple of weeks ago, to have greater confidence. Right? If you want to hear the voice of God, if you want to respond to the voice of God, if you want to be able to have confidence and be able to declare peace over your situation, the storms of your life, then you have to have a little bit of understanding, a little bit of know. Be in relationship with Jesus to understand that so that you can respond in faith. When God says go, you're like, man, let's go, let's do this. Right? Have that confidence. Or to understand that there are certain environments that really foster spiritual growth and spiritual understanding. And the disciplines, the spiritual disciplines that we set up in our lives, they're not the end goal. It's just the means toward a goal. It's just an environment. It's just a structure. It's just putting parameters. It's just providing framework for us to be able to reach our destination, to be able to reach our goal, which Eric said last week is so true, is the presence of God. It's Jesus. He is the source of life. Life is not in the disciplines, but the disciplines provide the avenue, the vehicle, the path, the means toward the end goal, which is to be with Him, to enjoy Him, to have greater confidence, to be transformed by the power and the presence of Jesus. To be transformed by Him. So you need to know this. You can change. And I shared that 2 weeks ago. That question, I heard someone propose that question. Do we ever change as people? Does humanity ever change? And that question again, it's a lingering question that bothers me. Because maybe you're experiencing today, or maybe you know somebody close to you and you're asking yourself that same question of maybe yourself or somebody close to you. Do I change? Do they change? Maybe the atmosphere of our lives needs to change to foster an environment where change and transformation can be possible so that we don't have to struggle and wrestle with that. We can look back and say, yes, God meets me, and God meets me in spontaneous moments, but yes, He meets me in those moments that I carve out intentionally for Him, in those moments as well. He is the goal. You and I can change. So today I want to talk about the importance of community life, of creating space for community life. And I want to say a couple of declarative statements, and the first one is this: you were created for community. You were created for community. And you've heard that before. None of us are islands in and of ourselves. We're not to be islands. We're not to live independently of each other, but it's such a true statement, and yet it's a statement that we can find ourselves really kicking against, can't we? The idea that we were created for community. Here's the other declarative statement that I want to make. Life is best lived when it's lived with others. When we share it with others. There's an example that comes to mind of just this idea, and it happened within the last couple of years. And there was someone in our church that I began having coffee with, and just kind of getting to know them a little bit, and they were getting to know me. And so through the conversation, I got to hear more of his story, and he began to share about some of the context and the culture which he was a part of. And just generally speaking, you don't need to make anything more of this than what it is. I've been in more conservative environments. He came out of more liberal environment, but he was a more conservative person in a liberal environment. And it's not so much about the environments, but it was about what he said that really it's like a light bulb went on. And he said, there was a lot of people within this culture, this environment of if you wanted to be a Christian, you had to be a certain way. And so for the very first time in my life, it's like, that makes sense. I'd always heard it on one end that if you're a Christian, you have to vote this way, say this, do this, and this is what it looks like. Here's the box you're in. Now for the very first time, I'd heard it from somebody else from a different context and culture that the same thing is said on the other side. But notice where that came out of. It came out of the context of community, being in relationship, listening or sitting down and listening to somebody else's story. That is why community is so important. So there are a few aspects here that I want to talk about to community life. In Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 and 25, it talks about there that you and I, that we're to stir or spur one another on toward good works, good deeds. There's something about being around each other, hearing our stories, hearing our devotion, hearing of what we do and give ourselves to, that inspires us. When I listen to your stories, and I look at your life, and I hear about the things that you've done, the places you've been, and the things that Jesus is doing in your life, you know what? That inspires me. And I hope in the same way when I share stories about my life, and I talk about my failures, and we talk about things, and I talk about things that in the same way, I hope that I inspire you. That's living life in community. Spurring one another on toward love and good deeds. And it says there also in verse 25, it says, and let us not stop meeting, gathering as some are in the habit of doing. There's something about meeting with others, whether it's in a larger context or in a smaller context, that's so important to community life. So the example I shared just a minute ago is one that it's one of the many benefits of living in community with others. It's one of the many benefits of fellowship, of sharing life with other followers of Jesus. In Acts chapter 2, verse 42, it says that the early church, they got into this habit, this crazy habit. It says early on that they devoted themselves, they continually were devoting themselves to listening or to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, and to the breaking of bread. There was something significant and important about meeting together, about gathering, about living in community together. And if you think about the word devotion, I like that word devotion. Anybody else like the word devotion? To be devoted. Again, our mission statement is to develop devoted followers of Jesus. It's just an idea of taking it a little step further than just something we're casually committed to something that we're intentional about, that's something we're creating space and opportunity for, right? So we're developing devoted followers. But you think about the idea of devotion, that idea of devotion, it's this idea of giving attention to something. When you're devoted to something, it means you're committed to it. It means that you're giving attention to it. So it says that the early church, they continually devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, and to the breaking of bread. It means they gave attention to it. They were intentional about it. They created space in their minds, space in their schedules, in their lives for this to happen. It was important to them. And we all know things that are important to us. We create space for them. And you're here, Memorial Weekend, not out camping, doing something else. Why? Because it's important to you. So thank you for that. So in that sense, I could be speaking to the choir, But I think it's still important to be reminded of that. Giving attention to community life is so important. Think about the things you give attention to. You think about them. You prepare for them. You give yourself to them. You Google about them. You talk with others about those things. You share it with others. You invite others into that narrative, into that space of your life. You spend energy and resources toward those things. And so I just want to remind us again of the importance of using, in that same sense, of thinking about the resources and the energy that we put into community life. If it's important to us, we will make space for it. Both large and small gatherings add value in that sense to our lives because they remind us consistently of the importance of community. Each have a purpose. Now, if you think about it, there's a dynamic associated, connected to gathering with others that you and I, we just can't get any other place. I'm going to talk about a couple of those. The first one is this, and that's the idea of mission. It's the idea of mission. It's inspiring to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. Now, if you want to be a part of something bigger than yourselves, then we have to learn to get outside of ourselves, right? We can't hide away in a corner in our house, in our backyard, behind our fence, closed-in spaces if we want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. Community, living life with others, it invites us, it encourages us to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. What we can accomplish collectively together is always more than what we're capable of doing and achieving and accomplishing on our own, by ourselves. Think about the resources and the opportunity that are just represented in this room here right now. It's like it multiplies the effort of just one of us. The opportunity, because of us together going forward, moving somewhere together, is just astronomically. It increases in that sense. It's larger. It's bigger than just one of us. So the impact of what we can do together will always add up to more than the impact of just one of us individually out there trying to do it on our own. Our missional thrust and reach is dependent upon us devoting ourselves to the mission of Jesus. We're in this together. Right? We talk about our mission as a church because we want you to have buy-in. We want us together to move forward. We want to be a blessing in our community. We want to make a difference in our community. We're not just here to pat each other on the back, right, every Sunday and say, and just be a Bless Me Club. We're so much more than that. We're living on mission together. That's why we talk about our mission. That's why we talk about the mission. Because we want to put ourselves in His way to be poured out for His glory and His honor. It was Jesus who said in Matthew 18, or Matthew 16, I should say, it was Jesus who said, I will build my church. Guess what? Jesus is building this church. And He's building it through us, His people. Living on mission, fulfilling the Great Commission, taking the gospel forward, telling this narrative of lives that have been changed and transformed. He's building His church, and this is the beauty of His body. Now, often in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 24, we once a month we'll do communion together, and we'll talk about the importance, and we'll make this statement that Paul made in Corinthians that His body is broken for us. Jesus said, this is my body which is broken for you. And we often think about it in that sense, and sometimes we don't think about it in the sense that we are His broken body to the world. There's something beautiful and wonderful and mysterious and extraordinary about being the broken body of Christ to the world around us. We are His broken body. If you're a part of the church, if you're following Jesus, then you are part of this broken body. You're a part of this narrative that is being told to the world. We are it. We are the broken body of Jesus to our world, and none of us need to look around and spend too much time thinking about it because we know we're broken. We're broken people. If you talk about, what is one of the main hindrances that people have to, going to church and being a part of a Jesus movement, and they'll say it's the church, it's the people, it's the hypocrites. It's the broken people. Whether you're in the church or outside the church, there's brokenness in the church, there's brokenness outside the church, but there's something beautiful when you think about this mosaic picture that comes together of grace when God works within that imperfection to reveal himself to the world. This is my body which was broken for you. God uses the broken body of Christ to reach the world. And what a beautiful story it is when people can see us working through our brokenness. Jesus said, they will know you are my disciples by your love, the love that you have for one another. Brokenness, working through that brokenness. Because I think we all understand this is problematic. A broken world or a broken body reaching a world that needs something different. Because we get our imperfections, we get our flaws, we get that we have a hard time with certain types of people. And we want to avoid certain types of people, and we get that there's diversity, and sometimes certain folks annoy us and rub us wrong, and we get all that because we're humans, and yet we're a part of this beautiful, wonderful, broken body. So we're not always good at it, are we? Of letting the world know. There's something amazing and beautiful and wonderful as Jesus works grace and truth and mercy and compassion and love and kindness through brokenness, failure, hardship, heartache, grief. Together we're called to go. See, living in community prepares us and inspires us to live out the broken body to the world. Mission is important to the community life. The second thing I want to bring out is the importance of character development. In community, there's missional thrust. Not only is there missional thrust, but there's opportunity for the shaping of our lives to become people of character. See, I believe that there's something significant about knowing and being known. There's something critical and crucial in our society today about looking each other in the face, about sitting down with another person, another human, and listening to their story, looking into their eyes, hearing their brokenness, sharing our brokenness. There's something that can't be replaced behind a computer screen, behind a behind a media, social, platform, account. Social media is incapable of shaping our character. It's through one-on-one. It's through relationship. God uses relationship to shape our character. This Jesus life, listen, makes the most sense when it's lived out in community with others, because what it does is it forces us. It challenges us. It encourages us. It beckons us to live this life out in front of others, where they get to see our flaws, where we get to come with our as-is tag and say, this is who I am, this is what I have to offer, and if you don't like it, I'm sorry. But it's a challenge, isn't it, on both sides of knowing and being known. I'm good for you. You're good for me. We are good for each other. I'm good for you, you're good for me, we are good for each other. That should be a song. Is there a song out there? Just kind of like this. But I'm good for you, you're good for me. We're good for each other. See, living in community with others is good for our character. See, God uses people and experiences and wrongs, and he uses all of those things to shape us. I am shaped today because of the people in my life that God has used to shape me and my character. And you are who you are today because of the people and the experiences that God has used to shape you and your character. The people that have wronged you, the people that have wounded you, the people that have hurt you deeply, the people that have come alongside you and have been your greatest, your best cheerleaders, the ones that have encouraged you and said, you know what, you can do it. You can get up tomorrow morning and you can live the life that God says you can live. All of it becomes an important aspect in community life of God using that to shape us. And yet sometimes what is our human tendency? Eric mentioned last week the human tendency to drift inward, and we have a human tendency, to drift when things get hard, to isolate ourselves, to pull away from community because it hurts sometimes and it's hard sometimes, and we want to run from it because it's one of the things that God uses to shape us and to mold us and to make us listen into his image. We learn about ourselves through community. We learn about others through community. We learn about God through community. When I can hear your perspective and you can hear my perspective, and you'll say something that challenges me and I'll say something that challenges you, and we can have disagreement and still get along and still love Jesus. That's true, authentic community. We learn about forgiveness and its importance through interactions with one another. I say something that causes offense. You say something, and so we learn to deal with hurt, handle hurt the right ways, the right avenues, the right pathways in which to handle those. Listen, those things don't happen in a vacuum. They happen through relationship when we're living in community with one another. I was thinking about in Matthew 18:21, it's there that Peter's asking about forgiveness, and Jesus is talking about forgiveness, and Peter's like, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? And he says 7 times, and it's there Jesus says no, 70 times 7. Where do you learn about forgiveness? In community. Where do we learn about the darkness of our own hearts when we're unwilling to forgive and we carry around bitterness in our hearts? We learn about that in community. What about in Luke chapter 9, verse 49? It's there that Jesus had his closest to him, and there were some outside of their group who were casting out demons, and they were upset about it. They're like, Jesus, did you hear? They're doing things in your name. They're not with us. They're not following you in the same way that we are. How often do we do that in our own culture? Right? We look how somebody else is following Jesus. They're not doing it like we are. They're not part of our team, our tribe. They got it wrong. They shouldn't be doing those things, saying those things, acting that way. And it's there that Jesus said, they're not against us, they're for us. Listen, we just happen to be a small part of a larger tribe. And some people might not live out the life that we do in the sense that we do and the way that we do with the disciplines that we do. That doesn't make them less, doesn't make them more, doesn't make us more. We can do it differently and still be on this path of somehow God uses all of those things, right, to bring us closer to him, to make us more like his son. What about in Luke chapter 9, another story? It's there that what was it, Peter or it could have been James and John, and they found out that something was going on, and they're like, should we call fire down on them? Should we call down a judgment? And Jesus said, no. Took that as an opportunity to teach them. And so there are teaching moments, right, within community, and those moments happen. What about Jesus with the little children? And it was with the 12 and those closest to him, and others were bringing their children, and they wanted Jesus to bless them. They're like, Jesus doesn't have time for this. And it's there that Jesus talked about the importance of children. But it was all within the context of relationship. Through relationship, he said, let the children come unto me. Such is the kingdom. The kingdom belongs to such as these. Listen, character development, think about your life, think about my life. It plays out best in community. When I'm in relationship with others. In the context of community, knowing and being known is hard, and it takes work, and we get disappointed, and we fail, but we keep coming back to it because it's an important part of living the Jesus life. It's important that we do it one-on-one, and it's important we do it in groups, and it's important we do it in larger settings because there's something about the setup, the context, the framework that God uses to develop character in us. It happens organically, yes, and it also happens intentionally. God uses others to shape our character, to conform us into the image of Jesus. And again, the shaping cannot happen in a vacuum. In that sense, we need community. You might be here today, you might be like, I don't need community. I don't need fellowship. I can do it by myself. I can do it I can meet by myself on my own in my home, and you can. And there's something to that. But listen, there's something, though, that cannot happen in that context that happens in a context with others. And that is a lot of what I just described to you. Much of life, listen, is about learning to play well with others in the sandbox. Sometimes little kids, you put them in a sandbox, you put them in a playground, and they have a hard time playing with each other. Got to teach them, come alongside. The same is true with adults. You put adults in a sandbox, and sometimes we don't play well with each other. So much of community is about learning to play well with others in the sandbox. You were created to know and be known, which leads me to another important aspect of community life, and that's the aspect of confession. Community, knowing, being known, living on mission. And then there's this other important part called confession that really plays out. 1 Corinthians 1, 27 and 28 says that God chose weak things and lowly things and despised things to tell a story about who he is and what he's like. I would propose to you today that one of those weak, small, despised, lowly things possibly is confession. And I say weak, lowly, despised things because there are people who look at confession and see it as weakness, who see it as a detractor, who only want to put their best foot forward in that sense. Just imagine, think about this. Those of you that think about maybe if you've been on a date, think about your first date. How many of you had a fairly decent experience in your very first date? Okay? One of the reasons why you probably had a fairly decent experience is you put your best foot forward, right? Just imagine what your date would look like, though, if it contains some of this in your first conversation. You're sitting down across the table from them, and you start the conversation with this. You're not the first gal that I've kissed. I just want you to know, I just need to get it out. It needs to get, my conscience needs to get out of my conscience. You know what? I cheated on my SATs. Or I lied to my mom. You know what? I've been cheating on my hours at work. What would that do to your first date? Probably wouldn't set you up real well for a second date. Come on, how many know what I'm talking about? Because we head into that first date, and what do we want to do? We want to put our best foot forward, and so we're just talking about the good things and the things we do well and the things that we like, and we got to keep it light and all those things because we don't want to put too much out there. We don't want to go too deep, too heavy, too quick. So we might find ourselves in a whole lot of trouble, right? Especially if you like the person. Now, if you don't, necessarily see yourself going any further with a person, then yeah, let's just throw all the dirt, all out there, and then, maybe you don't have to, maybe that would be attractive to that person. I don't know, but just think about that. What happens, though, you think about it in the relationship is there's a different dynamic. We go into it, and it's all about, the best and the good, and we lay it all out. And And then over time, our brokenness creeps in, and our character flaws creep in, and our idiosyncrasies and the weird things we do, and bad breath, and I mean, all of those things, they come in, and in that sense, it's like you got to figure out how to get along with somebody in that place. It's much easier when you don't know about all the other stuff, right? Think of the ultra-competitive environments, maybe. Anybody, have you ever been in like ultra-competitive environments? If you've ever been in an ultra-competitive athletic environment or a work environment or an educational environment, Eric, you could be in it right now. It's all about what's behind my name. It's all about how good I am. It's all about my accomplishments. It's all about the things that I have done well, better than other people, right? Ultra-competitive environments. It's about those things. It's about strength. It's where you talk about your victories. And it's the way, you talk about staying on top, and you stay on top through your strength, and you don't let others see a softer side, because if you let others see a softer side, then it's like this, there's a vulnerability in the armor, so to speak. So you keep it on the strength, the victory side, because we don't want to allow our weakness to be exploited by others. We don't want others to see it as an opportunity to cut or jab or. As true as that may be, you want to mix things up a little bit. An environment like that, just throw something out like, hey, man, last night I had this bad thought. Here's what the thought was. I hurt somebody last week, and it really hurt my heart. Try confessing a failure. Just watch what it does to the environment. Want to shake things up a little bit? Flip it. See, confession requires a certain amount of vulnerability with each other. And obviously, don't take me out of context. There's a safe place for it, and there are unsafe places. And I'm not saying just be flippant with it by any means. But confession there's power in confession. See, God chose weak things, despised things, lowly things to shame the strong. And I'm thinking that confession is one of the weak things that God has chosen to shame the strong and the wise, because there's this counterintuitive power in confession. So I want to ask, when was the last time that you confessed something to someone, somewhere, at some time? James 5:16 says that we're to confess our sins one to another and to pray for one another so that we may be healed. And what's interesting about that is James seems to connect. Okay, I'm not saying if you're sick and if you have things going on in your body that it's because of unconfessed sin, but James seems to connect it here that there is a possibility, that there is a potential link between certain sicknesses in the body, between that and unconfessed sin. When sin begins to weigh heavy, right, on our conscience, and it's just something we can't shake, and it's something we carry around day after day, and year after year, and month after month, that weight begins to add up. And you know what? Our bodies are affected by that weight. And so James says, confess. This is why confession is so important. And it's something that we should probably practice more. I was just recently with one of our leaders, and he said, that's one of the things that the Catholic Church has gotten right. They've done a good job of is in practicing, encouraging confession. It's such an important part to the health of our souls as people, as humans. There's something we can learn. So there's the confession before God. 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins to him, he's faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and to heal us of all unrighteousness. There's vertical confession, then there's horizontal confession, James 5:16. Confession is freeing. It's able to let go of that heavy weight. As we confess, it frees us, it lifts that weight, it sets us on a path of healing and restoration. And not only that, but in that sense too, God can use that in the sense too of keeping us from sinning. Think about that. it plays this other role in too, that it's like it loses its power when we confess it. There's something about bringing sin into the light, where in the light it loses its power. Come on up, Pastor Sky. Proverbs 28:13 says, "He who conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them will find compassion." Confession. And then lastly, care. Care is such an important part of community life.